Hey, it's the Flip Coach, and I wanted to do a follow-up video on the post that I did the other day about the three main areas of real estate that most people break into real estate or are most common, which is wholesaling, fix and flip, and buy and hold. Now, of course, there's many different aspects to real estate investing, but these are the three most common. So I had said in that video that I'm going to break each one of these down to give you a little bit more of the concepts behind them, the pros and cons, that sort of thing. So let's talk today about wholesaling. I've been wholesaling properties for about 15 years now, and wholesaling is the basis of my the foundation of my real estate investing. It's really where a great place to start, and it's a great place to have a foundation because you can then find your fix and flip and your buy and hold properties from your wholesale business. Okay, so wholesaling. Wholesaling as a concept is purchasing something. Usually it's purchasing something in bulk. You're getting it at a discount, and then you're selling it for more than you paid for it to the next person, and then that person is selling it, usually retail, for more money. So if I bought 10,000 widgets and I sold them, and I bought them for $1, and then I sold them to 10 retailers for $1.25 each, and then those retailers sell them for retail at $3.18 a piece. We both made money. Okay, so in real estate, it's almost the same thing, except we're not really doing it in bulk. Let's just talk about one property at a time. What I'm doing is I'm finding a discounted property, and the discount is usually because it's in a distressed situation. They could be behind in their mortgage payments. That's a pre-foreclosure. They could be behind in their property taxes. They could be behind in their taxes from the IRS, and they need to sell their property, take that equity out, and pay off the IRS so they don't go to jail. I've actually done a couple of those deals over the years. So the idea is that as a wholesaler, you're reaching out to homeowners, finding motivated sellers, getting their properties at a discounted price so that you can then wholesale that property to another investor that's either going to do a rehab or a buy and hold. And you always want to make sure that you're leaving enough meat on the bone for the next investor. That's very important in wholesaling. So if I buy a property for $250,000 and I sell it to another investor for $300,000, they should be able to sell that property after they put on the new roof and the new kitchen and new bathrooms and new AC and flooring and paint and everything else. And they've got their holding costs and their commissions that they pay when they sell the property. They've got their closing costs, the interest they're paying on their hard money. They should be able to sell that property for a price that they will get all of those expenses back and make themselves a profit. Now, the amount of profit is depending upon the investor. Some investors are more greedy than others. I have some investors that I know that will take a 10% profit because they just want to do enough projects that they'll keep their crews, busy so they don't lose any of their guys and any of their contractors. So they want to keep their people busy. So, usually for me, 20 to 25% is the range that I like to be in for profit. But there are investors out there that, 10% profit. So maybe that investor, when I sent it out to all of my buyers, that investor offered $5,000 more because, they're willing to take a little bit less profit. But you want to leave enough meat on the bone for the next person, okay? Another very important concept of wholesaling is that there's no such thing as a wholesale property. People say, I've got a good wholesale property for you. There's no such thing. Your wholesaling is a method. The type of property is whether it's a single family home, a condo, a townhome, a multifamily, a vacant piece of land, because all of those can be wholesaled. Wholesaled is an action. It's a way of conveying your property, so it's not a property type. Now, when I look at wholesale properties, I look at the opportunity of what I can do with it. Maybe it turns into a fix and flip or a rehab property, but just refer to the property as a single family home that you're wholesaling, and it's a pre-foreclosure, and they're behind on their property taxes as well. Okay, that's the distress situation. So now let's talk about the two different methods of wholesaling. So we have assignments of contracts and we have double closing. Now, first of all, wholesaling has become very, very popular because there's a lot of gurus out there on the internet that I see every single day that are basically like, you could learn how to sell properties and make money and have a real estate business without any of your own money. Well, the idea of being able to wholesale properties without having any money at all is false, because when you put a property in contract, You have to have consideration behind the contract, or it's not a valid contract. So when I put a property in contract, I have to put up an earnest money deposit. So I use a FAR bar as is contract. I put up an earnest money deposit. $1,000 is the average, but sometimes my seller wants $5,000 or $10,000. I don't really care what earnest money deposit that I have to put up, because I know that one aspect that I love about wholesaling is that you should never lose money. And the reason why is that in either method, whether you're assigning a contract or you're doing a double closing, when you put a property in contract for wholesale, you want to give yourself inspection days. I usually leave the space blank on the FAR bar as is contract. That gives me 15 days automatically. But if the seller says something and they're like, you only need 5 days or 7 days is all they're going to agree to, I'll put 5 or 7 days in. That's my contingency period. That's the time that I have to say, you know what, I don't want to buy the property. I don't really like the area that it's in, or it's too small. I want to buy bigger houses. So I cancel the contract. I don't really need to have any valid reason why, and I get my earnest money deposit back as long as I'm in my inspection period. As soon as I go out of my inspection period, as a cash deal, I have no other contingencies, and so if I back out of the deal, the seller can keep my earnest money deposit. Okay, very important. So within those 15 days, I want to make sure if I got 15 days of inspection periods, that's when I'm going to be marketing my property to sell my property to someone else. Okay. So again, if I have a property at $250,000, I'm going to wholesale it. Let's say that I put it out for $300,000. If I really thought that it could be sold retail for like $700,000 and somebody's going to make a lot of money on it, then obviously I would put it out for maybe $350,000, maybe $400,000. It just depends, what the numbers are. You have to run the numbers. I'll do a video on that at some later time. So when I put the property in contract with my seller, I shop it to my buyers and I find a buyer. Now let's say that I find a buyer and I'm in contract for $250,000, but the best offer that I could get from one of my buyers was $270,000. So it's $20,000 profit, okay, which is a good profit, but I want to make sure that I get as much of that profit as possible, that I don't, incur too many costs buying and selling the property, doing a double closing. So on an assignment, I can take the contract and I can go to my buyer and say, look, I'm going to give you an assignment of contract. You're going to buy the property for $270. I'm buying it for $250. And here's an assignment of contract that we have an agreement that you're going to have to do everything that I've said I'm doing in my contract that I gave to the seller over here. And now I'm stepping out and I'm letting the buyer and the seller do the transaction A to C, and I'm getting my assignment fee when it's all said and done. Okay? So basically you're putting a property in contract, and then you're assigning that contract to another buyer with an assignment of contract document that's usually like just 1 page is all you need. And it basically just says that, you as the wholesaler are assigning this contract with this seller of this property to this buyer for this amount. Okay. And one other very important aspect is that if you put $1,000 deposit down, you want your buyer to put more of a deposit than you put down. So you want your buyer to put a $5,000 deposit down, because if that buyer doesn't close on the property and doesn't buy it, your seller is going to keep your $1,000 deposit, but you get to keep their $5,000 deposit. So if your buyer backs out and doesn't close, you'll at least still make $4,000 instead of your $20,000 fee. Now, that's an assignment, and it's very popular because, again, it's very easy, and people are like, oh, you can do this easily. You don't have to have any money, which, okay, you have to have that earnest money deposit. But let's say you only have to have a minimum amount of money. You don't have to put up the money to actually buy the property and then wholesale the property once you're the owner to someone else. Although there are ways of getting around that as well. You don't necessarily have to come up with all that money. And that's what a double closing is. A double closing is where I actually close on the property, A to B, with my seller. I actually wire money to the title company for $250,000 plus my closing costs, which, could be upwards of $3,000, $4,000. Then my buyer is going to wire their money to the title company, and we're going to do the B to C transaction, and that's when I sell the property to my buyer. So the idea is that with that $20,000 margin that I had in there, I'm going to pay closing costs on each side. I'm going to pay closing costs when I when I buy the property, and I'm paying closing costs when I buy the property. And that might cost me another $8,000. I might only net $12,000 altogether. But here's why I might do that instead of assigning the contract. Because I know you're probably saying, well, why would you do that? Why would you just sign the contract for $20,000? What if my buyer doesn't like the aspect that I'm getting the property for $250,000 and they're paying $270,000 from it? They know that I'm making money on it, but they might not know that I'm making $20,000. What if that assignment fee, what if I'm actually getting it in contract for $250,000, but I'm selling it for $350,000 and it's $100,000? I could go to my buyer and say, hey, I don't want to pay double closing costs, so I want to do an assignment. And then my buyer says, wait a second, you're making $100,000 on me? I'm doing this rehab and I'm barely going to make any money, and you're making $100,000, and they might back out of the deal. Same thing with your seller. If you do an assignment, your seller's going to know that you're actually assigning this to someone, because the closing documents are going to have your assignment fee that is going to be on there. And your seller might really get upset. Maybe they just don't close on the property. Maybe they don't sign those final documents. Or maybe they find out before that and they just back out of the deal completely. You have to be very careful and not be too greedy. If you're making a $100,000 fee, don't assign it. Do a double closing. They will find out 30 days later when it's recorded in public record, but usually people don't go back and check. So, and over 20 years, I've never had anybody go back and check and come back to me and get upset because I made that extra money. The seller got what they wanted, and the buyer paid for the property what they agreed to pay for it. So the reason why, another reason why that I don't usually do, that I do the assignments, the only time that I do the assignments is if there's a very low margin for me. So if I, took that $250,000 property, but I could only sell it for $260,000, there's $10,000 there. After my closing costs, let's say my closing costs are $8,500 on for me to purchase and for me to sell it, I'm gonna make $1,500. No, I'll take the risk then to say, okay, Mr. Buyer, you don't want to pay more than $260, even though I put it out on my list for $300. Fine, I'm going to do an assignment because I'm buying it for $250 and you're agreeing to buy it for $260, and I'm going to get my $10,000 fee. And I'm sure they'll be happy with that. Then you're going to go to the seller and you're going to say, hey, listen, I really wanted to buy this property. Remember when I came in at $220,000 and you talked me into buying it for $250,000? Well, I'm bringing in a partnering investor, or I'm going to sell it to another investor to do the rehab on it because they know more about rehabbing than I do. And I'm going to sell it to them for a higher price. So I'm just letting you know. And as long as everybody is okay with it, then I do the assignment. I just make sure I disclose with everybody, and usually everybody is okay because they're happy to get their $250,000 and your buyer's happy to get it for $260,000. So you kind of have to make those judgments yourself. But assignments are just not as easy as they make it sound. And sometimes if you're having a very large margin of profit, why rock the boat? Just do your A to B with your seller and then B to C with your buyer. They can find out later, but at least the transaction's done and you've pocketed, your big profit, especially if you made that $100,000. So that is what wholesaling is. And you have to make sure too that you find a good investor-friendly title company that knows how to do a double closing. And also in your double closing, when I said before about the money, is that you can find people that will put up the money for the double closing because they understand wholesaling. If you got a successful wholesaler in your area, that will put up the money and say, yeah, I'll put up the money for 24 hours because that's really all it takes. Same day, simultaneous closing, double closing, those are the same thing. So you're closing with the seller in the morning and you're selling the property with your buyer in the afternoon, same day. And a good title company knows that they're not going to do the A to B transaction until your B to C, your buyer's money is there covering it to make sure you don't get stuck with that property. Because if you do the A to B and your buyer disappears, you just bought that property. So you want to have an investor-friendly title company. You can find people that will put up the money for you for the 24 to 48 hours. They'll usually charge like maybe a point or something, maybe 1%. You got to make sure that you have a good title company that understands that, before they do the A to B, they want their B to C, make sure that your buyer's money is there at their title company so they're not really going to be able to back out. And if you're going to decide to assign it, make sure you disclose it to both sides and make sure you're just not being greedy and assigning, big profits. Assignments should be for smaller profits that you don't want to eat up with closing costs. and then double closing or simultaneous same-day closing is going to be for your bigger profits. So that's wholesaling, and I'll be posting another video on a little bit more detail on fix and flip and buy and hold as well over the next couple of days. So be looking out for those. In the meantime, happy investing.